Hi everybody, I'm Vicky and this is this week's homeschooling drop-in with myself and Elsa Clark. I'm the co-founder and director of Vilo Sky, and we're a social enterprise that are focused on creating inclusive workplace cultures. Over the last forever, actually, it feels now, we've been focusing on working parents and trying to consider the culture that is in workplaces in support of working parents, males and females, to try and just consider some of the gender equality discussions that occur around that. But obviously right now, everything has gone out of the window with the fact that we're currently homeschooling. So what these sessions are about is just to give us some time to get together to talk about current homeschooling issues, to have a break from homeschooling, and to chat with our resident expert on homeschooling, which is Elsa Clark. So I will hand over to Elsa right now to introduce herself, and then we will dive into today's session. The format of these sessions, Elsa and I will have a chat about today's topic, which is dealing with homeschooling, uncertainty and change. We'll start off with our wins and frustrations of the week. So Elsa, as soon as you've introduced yourself, if you want to dive into yours. And then we will talk about Elsa's top tips for the week as well before closing. So we tend to talk for around 20 to 25 minutes, and that will be us. Any questions that anybody has from our live audience, feel free to ask in the chat box. Otherwise, we look forward to engaging people on YouTube, where this will be posted later on. So Elsa, over to you.
Hey, I am Elsa Clark. I am a teacher of 16 years. Experience. English secondary is my first subject, but I also now teach one-to-one, everybody from age 5 up to 18. Lots of different ages, stages and levels of ability, which has not prepared me at all for homeschooling my own child. So I have an 8-year-old, and he has additional support needs, so he's a bit of a handful. I have previously explained him as a bit of a Tasmanian devil to homeschool, but we're all still here, we're all still breathing, so that's probably my win of the week actually, Vicky. It's been a tough week here. Nobody died, that's my win of the week. Oh, seriously, my win of the week is probably getting the necessary tasks done, and not all of them, but the necessary ones. So we prioritised and we called time on it when it was all getting too much. Frustration of the week is the same, I guess, as every working parent. It's not having space and time to do your job to the standard you would like to do it, and to do as much of it as you would do it. So what about yourself, Vicky?
So my wins and frustrations, it's quite hilarious that we've got to, well, it's week 4 of our homeschooling drop-ins, but a lot longer than that we've been homeschooling, and we're at the point where severe injury is actually seen as a lack of severe injury is seen as a win. So yeah, that's probably one observation we need to talk about, maybe offline, Elsa. But my wins and frustrations this week are probably the opposite sides of the coin. So one of my wins was, and this is kind of a theme that we've had, is to level my expectations. And it was one of your tips from last week. And I think so we're in Edinburgh, and pre-half term, which was last week, it definitely felt like it had reached a pinnacle of stress, and everybody in the house just not coping that well with the situation. So leveling those expectations, having the break of half term was great, and coming back this week, and so we didn't hand in any work the week before half term that we were supposed to, and I felt awful. And after last week's session, I let it go, and so that was great, to get back to that point where I was like, it's okay, we're all doing our best. We're not teachers homeschooling, we're working parents trying our best to do both things in these weird circumstances. So that was a massive win, I think, to see that mindset shift happen in practice this week, because I've carried it forward now that we're homeschooling again, and I've just sort of taken the pressure off myself. The kids had the day off school yesterday. I really hope that the teacher doesn't listen to this, but because I had an extraordinarily busy day work-wise, so I just wasn't able really to spend that time with them, and my husband was away, so I think that that was great. But then the flip side, so I've taken some lessons from what we've been talking about. I lost my temper with my son this morning again, because he wasn't doing something that just seemed so obviously easy, and it was a continuation of a task that he didn't do on Tuesday because I recognise that there's difficulties for the kids in the way the brain works, and I think we're going to talk a bit about that today. It didn't help. I still lost my temper and went just from 0 to a million I was like, I don't know if you've seen Inside Out, that little the angry one. I love that. My head just
great.
Really quickly. So it's an ongoing challenge, I think, but I was frustrated with myself that even though I knew it and was aware of it, I wasn't able to use those lessons to I don't know, be a bit easier on us all. So still ongoing challenge, but yeah, two sides. So two really opposite sides, I think, to the coin.
Yeah, but it's a good teaching point as well for our kids when we do lose it, is going back and saying, I'm really sorry, I was feeling like this, I was feeling frustrated, and we have a lot of discussions around feelings. In fact, Inside Out is brilliant for teaching your kids emotional intelligence. So don't think of it as you failed, think of it as a teaching point.
Well, in that case, it's going to be a massive success because my kids are going to be very understanding of emotional intelligence after this process, I think. So moving on to our topic of today, which is dealing with uncertainty and change in the homeschooling context. And I think it's a really good time to be talking about that with what's hopefully going to be a phase back to school, particularly in Scotland. So I've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my daughter's going back from next Monday, which is great. We don't think that other children are going to be returning until at least the 15th of March, I think is the latest assumption. In England, no solid date yet, but I think the 8th of March has been touted as being possible, and Boris seems, I don't know, a little bit more gung-ho and positive than possibly some of the sentiment up here. But I think certainly from my personal perspective with next week, I've got one child who's going back and another that's not. So when we think about the change that and how we deal with that, there's that side of things. But kids going back in general is going to create a lot of anxiety, I think, for the children and for parents as well. There's the safety issue. There's all those. So I think just from your perspective, like there's a few elements that I think we can cover, which is like the goalposts that keep changing. The fear and anxiety and stress that everybody might be going through at the moment, how long the situation is going to be happening, like not knowing that, so not being able to give a date for the children and for ourselves as well. So yeah, what's your view on that? How are you managing and coping and in your expert view?
With the uncertainty. Well, with uncertainty, I think the key to it is communication at an age appropriate level. So if you have a 5-year-old, explain that they will be safe when they go back to school and that things might change because we are all trying to make sure that we stay healthy and keep ourselves safe and keep other people safe. If you have a 14, 15, 16-year-old, then obviously that's slightly different. Their concern is going to be the uncertainty around how they're assessed for their exams. So I think the key to it all, first of all, is open and honest dialogue with your kids and also with any other adults in your house about how you as a family are going to manage that. And you share the information that you do know, whether that is about how the school day is going to be, or when school starts and finishes, or what you do know about SQA exams. For kids who are of exam age, you reiterate the fact that their teachers will make sure that they're okay and they're not disadvantaged. So it really depends on the nature of the uncertainty and what is unsettling them. I would say when there's uncertainty in the world outside, then structure at home is really important because homes are a safe place. So if they know that things are routine and predictable at home, whatever routine works for your family, then there is that kind of safe base, even though the outside world might be in a state of flux. For us as adults, I think it's kind of the same for us. We're creatures of habit naturally. So our routines, our sleeping and waking time, our exercise time, our time to work, we need to be kind of disciplined with ourselves to make sure that we manage our own anxiety and stress.
It's interesting you mentioned sleep there. Actually, one of the questions that we've had prior to today was about getting a teenager to go to bed on time. So specifically about teenagers, but I guess the bedtime routine, I mean, ours is all over the place right now. The kids are going to bed way later than they would be if we were getting them up to go to school, physically go to school. So any tips for how you would get a teenager to go to bed on time? But children more generally.
You can't make them go to bed. I think you have to negotiate with them. You know, I mean, I can't make my 8-year-old go to sleep. So somebody who's 14, 15, 16, you've got no chance. I think I would probably, again, it comes down to communication. I would probably sit down with them at a time that wasn't stressed and say, look, in order for us to function and be healthy and get on all right and to have a good work balance and relaxation time balance, we need a routine. If they don't have to get up and travel to go to school, then maybe they can go to bed a little later than they would normally on a school night. So I think with teenagers, it's giving a little bit, giving that little bit of room for negotiation, so that they feel that they have some kind of autonomy.
I guess that's a really important part, isn't it? Because particularly for teenagers who are learning to be adults, it's negotiation is a massive part of how we all live. I mean, it's how we navigate our lives as well. Even when we as parents, like I know for my bedtime and me sleeping, like sleep is so important, but I sacrifice sleep because of how my day has shifted. So I don't have time during the day now to do stuff that I was, because homeschooling is there and the children are there. So I'm having to use my evening to make up for that, which is invariably meaning I'm going to bed late. So we're doing that negotiation with ourselves as well. So I think that sounds a great idea to actually sit down and explain to the kids about sleep and just.
You know, this is even in terms of brain function, because teenagers their brains are developing at the same rate as a toddler's brain does. So there's two huge growth spurts in the brain. One is age 2 or 3 and one is in the teenage years. And that's why you have similar kind of extremities of emotion in both 3-year-olds, and kind of 14, 15 is the age where it kind of peaks in teenagers. But it's their frontal lobe is developing, all that kind of calculating risk, cause and effect, impulse control, that's still developing in teenagers. So they have all the feelings that they're an adult, but they don't have all the impulse control that adults should have. So you have to play to the fact that they're developing independence by negotiating with them a little, but also still having some boundaries in place, because you know, although God forbid you tell them, that they're going to mess up sometimes. You know, so it's you have to basically be a UN peacekeeping force with a teenager.
Oh gosh. I think what I'm hearing from that really, and this is like probably across whatever age our children are, it's about routine where appropriate and however that works for the families, and that's really hard right now, I think, to stick to any routine. I know that in our house, but just maybe having some islands of routine that you can rely on, and creating that sort of safe place, but also communication at a level that's appropriate for the age of the children, and being honest about what's happening, and transparent.
Honesty and routine. The other thing I was going to say about teenagers, which has just occurred to me actually, there's good evidence that because of all the changes in the brain and body at that age, teenagers actually find it a lot more difficult to wake up early enough to go to school. And a lot of them are quite dopey until about 11 o'clock in the morning. So if you're finding that, you can shift their school day later at home. And that means if they're still asleep, you get to work for a couple of hours and you don't have to worry about whether they're on the PlayStation or not.
Yeah. So that takes a bit of the stress off for you as a parent as well. And let's face it, I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is reduce stress for everybody right now in the situation that we're in. Cool.
And the other thing I would say about teenagers, sorry, there's just a hare run through the garden there. He's come to join in the webinar. Sorry, that distracted me somewhat. Other thing I was going to say about teenagers is technology in their rooms. In terms of phones, Xboxes, PlayStations, tellies, all the rest of it, a lot of them are on technology quite late into the night, and that then disrupts their sleep. So that's another kind of area of negotiation if your teenager is like that.
Cool. So I think it moves us quite nicely on to the next point we're going to discuss, which is about our brain, our response to all of this. But our brain is the thing that drives our response to it and our emotions. And I don't know about people who are listening and watching today, but I've heard before about the primitive brain and the sort of more cognitive side of our brain and how that works. But I know it's something that you're really interested in. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that and just how that is working with our emotions right now? One of the questions that we've had as well is about like staying calm and not losing it, which is something I definitely could do with getting better at.
So I think one of the greatest favors we can do ourselves and our kids is actually understand what's going on cognitively, our neuroscience, because the entire country, in fact the entire world, has existed in a state of prolonged stress and anxiety for a year, and that changes the way that our brain is functioning and the part of the brain that we're using. So if you have chronic underlying stress or anxiety, and it doesn't have to be something catastrophic, it can be something like working from home and homeschooling and uncertainty, ongoing uncertainty. The primitive part of your brain, at the base of your brain, is firing cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And that has several different effects. You'll see over a period of time, things like your immune system will be lowered. So you might find that you're feeling a bit yucky, or you get coughs or colds or whatever. You might find there's difficulty sleeping, or you might find that you sleep more than you would normally. And you'll find that your emotional responses are far faster. You live more in what I explained to my son is the downstairs part of your brain. So the downstairs part of your brain is for little kids. It's the primitive bit. It's all your emotions, but they're unregulated by the upstairs part, the frontal lobe, the cognitive bit. So all of us are living more in our downstairs brains at the moment. And that has several effects, not only in the emotional reaction, but in the ability to concentrate and in the ability to engage cognitively in your work or in your schoolwork, particularly when you are interrupted by your kids, or in the case of the kids, learning in an environment where you would normally play or relax and be with your family, where there's a lot of distractions. So a lot of people have said to me that their kids can't do things at home that they should be able to do really quite easily. Or they can do things one day that they can't do the next day. And that is possibly a brain thing, that they're just downstairs instead of upstairs for some reason. Is that making sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Sorry, I was scrambling there to somehow went on mute, actually. So I was just doing another tech thing. We've had a few technical problems today. Yeah, no, it does make perfect sense. And I think this is where breathing techniques kind of help, don't they? Because if you feel your emotions sort of starting to take over and overwhelm, or you can even see that with your children, to stop and take deep breaths, actually what that does is reset your that cortisol being released. It puts that circuit breaker in and actually pushes you into your frontal lobe. And that, so it's not just a case of take a deep breath, like, you know, you hear that, there's an actual cognitive reason why you take that breath, because it stops that whatever thought process is happening in your fight or flight or freeze zone. It helps you to rationalize it.
And sometimes with kids, what they need is a bit of redirection, because they can't calm down sometimes or regulate as quickly as adults can. So we had a meltdown here this morning, and it was obvious that learning was not going to happen until we were in the upstairs brain. So we sat down and said, what can you do to regulate and calm down? Do a puzzle. I went for a bath, because if I stayed in the same room, I would have become unregulated. So I went for a bath. He did a puzzle. Came back half an hour later, he said, I'm really sad, I'm sad, I had a meltdown. So we had a cuddle, did a bit of repair, and then he went and did his schoolwork. So I guess what I'm saying there is, don't feel that it's 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and if you've got a little bit of give in your day, obviously they have to do their work then. If they are obviously unregulated and not up for it, why would you make your life more difficult? Give them some space, redirection, a task to do, and then come back.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great approach, and just to find some way to take that, to remember it, I think, when you're in that moment, and if particularly with those of us who are pretty busy in our days with work as well, you know, to remember it in the half hour that you've got with the kids, you're actually going to be more constructive in that time with them, rather than, which has happened to me so often, spending that time me getting mad and the kids getting upset. So any spare time that I do have to work with them ends up being non-constructive, which just winds you up even more. Actually, it's a more efficient thing to do, to just take that time to try and regulate. Not that it's easy, I don't think. Sometimes it's just, sometimes you need to just blow up, I think, and just let it out.
Yeah, and that's what we say. Sometimes it's like a blister, and it's, you know, it has to pop before before things.
That's a lovely analogy there, Elsa.
It's a bit of a disgusting analogy. Sorry for that.
So, at risk of stealing the thunder from your 3 top tips, which we always do each week as well, considering the phase back, considering everything that's going on right now, and what's happening with our home circumstances, like, what do you think we can do? What would be the most valuable, effective thing to do right now in response to this, in response to the change and transitions that are happening?
Change and transitions that are happening. Are you talking about preparing the children for transitions?
I guess anything that's in the context of, a big change is going to come when they go back to school. There may still be uncertainty for some children. They've been back to school before and then come home again. So there's that uncertainty side of it still. You know, we've talked about sitting down with them. Is it basically that, just to keep them informed?
There are several different things you could do. I mean, there will be communications from school. We got a couple of emails this afternoon about how the return is going to look. So I would say discuss that with them at a time of the day where their ears are working, where they can actually listen and they can ask questions. With younger children, visual stuff might help as well. So walk past the school and point out to me, where's your classroom window? Get them to talk to you about what they're really looking forward to when they go back to school. Get them to discuss 1 or 2 things that they're maybe uncertain about, and you can try and reassure them. If they haven't seen their friends for a while, set up some kind of online meet where they all, I don't know, have a scavenger hunt and have to go and find daft things in the house. So reconnect them. You know, going back to school is about safety and security and reconnection. And the teachers will make sure that reconnection and that sense of security and well-being is prioritised. So if you have wee ones that are going back to school now, that would be useful to work on the reconnection. The kids P4 to secondary who are off for at least another few weeks, I would say make sure that you maintain that sense of connectedness with their peers. Walk past the school or go past the school if you can. Check in with their teachers. Do what you're doing, but also while that uncertainty exists for them, make sure that there's certainty in the house, that there's a routine that works for all of you, and that there is a real balance between their academic work and their rest, their play, their exercise, everything that makes you physically and mentally healthy.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think the action I'm definitely going to take away is with my 5-year-old who goes back on Monday. Like, she seemed really excited about going back, but it's worth me having an actual talk with her and not taking that at face value, I think. So the action I'm taking away is to sit down with her and her brother together and just talk about, this is what's going to happen. And I love the idea of walking past school. I think that's a great thing for us to do, and just start sort of giving them a chance to talk about any concerns that they might have, and not assuming that how they're acting on the surface is what we should take at face value. That's a great tip. Cool. So I mean, time is, as always, trickling away from us, so if we move on to your top 3 tips, and then I do have one more question that I just need to put to you, which has come from our audience.
Okie dokie. So top tips, first I would say structure and routine that works for everyone, and that extends to eating well, sleeping enough, taking regular breaks. Uninterrupted work, I think, would be second one. So make a clear distinction between play or recreation time and study time. And if that is having a separate area for them to work, then do that away from distractions. So away from tech if they're not using it, and away from toys. And third, I would say tangible rewards for their hard work. So, you know, do half an hour of your maths. What is it you're going to play with for half an hour after you've done that? Or, okay, get your math stuff done, and then go onto PlayStation and chat to your pals and play a game. Yeah, so especially for teenagers, there's that balance between socializing and study, but they need a clear division between the times if they're in a space where they usually socialize. They are all geared towards the kids. I think for adults, fourth tip, keep sane whatever way you can. And if that means you don't do everything, you don't do everything.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely down with that. Thank you. So just our last question before we come to a close is around actually giving the kids space and trusting them to do their work, but actually recognizing that the likelihood is that they'll do anything but schoolwork. And this is definitely a challenge I have with my 8-year-old, bless him, who he is at that age, but he just cannot do the work on his own. He won't do the work on his own, so we can't just leave him to do it. So how do we get that balance between giving them space and trusting them, but them actually doing the work they need to?
Age and stage appropriate, I guess. And the first thing I would come back to is communication. So if you have a teenager and you think they're in their bedroom and not doing what they should be, I would sit down and say, look, I'm worried about this, or I think this might be an issue. Can we talk about the times that you work and the times that you game, or the times that you are on your phone, or whatever? If that isn't working, or they won't engage with you, you either have to leave them to it, or you have to be a little more proactive in saying, right, you've got an English essay to write, should take you 45 minutes. So I'll come back and check you in 45 minutes, and then you can have half an hour doing whatever. I would say whatever the age and stage, set them targets, set them achievable targets. So that way you make sure that they know what they're doing. You go away and do your work, you come back and you check in on them. It's the same way as a teacher would approach it in class. They would set the task up, they would make sure that the children know what they're doing, leave them to it, come back and check in. I wouldn't be leaving them for hours at a time without checking. I'm sure people wouldn't do that anyway. And if that isn't working, I would say, is there a space in the living room, a desk in the living room, a place where they can work and you can work at the same time? So it's almost like you're sharing an office.
Cool.
It's not ideal, but at least they're there and you can keep an eye.
Great. Sounds like a plan. Sounds like definitely something to give it a shot. Anyway, I'll see if that works. With my son, who would be remiss of us not to show that there is an interruption on a homeschooling session. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Elsa. So it's always an amazing conversation to have, and some really key themes that I think we're covering there. And as always, it's going to change and evolve as we go from week to week. But in closing, I will say, as I always do, that we deserve such kudos for, as working parents who are dealing with a homeschooling situation right now, for all the resilience and hard work that we're putting into. It is a real challenge, it is tough, and I think everybody's doing an amazing job. So please come back next week, come chat to us, ask any questions beforehand and we'll try and cover them. But we look forward to seeing you then. And that's it, I think, from us this week. Elsa, anything to add?
Nope, just keep on doing what you're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye.